Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where I go over some more math facts. And today we'll be focusing on rounding numbers. Rounding numbers is going to be key for doing things later on in fourth grade and other grades as it relates to estimation and anything like that. So let's get started with some of the details and the rules to rounding numbers. So you're typically dealing with numbers 1 through 9. If you were to land in any place value where it's a 5 to a 9, you will end up rounding up to the next whole digit, or otherwise known as what I call to the sky. So if you have a 5 to 9, you're to the sky. Otherwise, if you have a number between 1 through 4, you end up rounding down or to the floor. So if you have a 2, you end up rounding down to the floor. So the best way to really get to understand and get a feel for this is going through some examples. So the first couple examples that I have for you today are going to focus on rounding numbers to the nearest thousand place value, which is highlighted in the blue coloring as I put a green dot inside it. Okay. And dealing with these numbers, you're going to be rounding and changing what I call the following number, which for my example will be 1,275. This number is called the follower because when the leader comes around and makes the decision on whether to round up or round down, the follower does as such, which means that the number 2, as we go right to understand if we round up or down, is going to be our leader. And our leader is the one that's going to tell the follower whether or not it's going to round up or it's going to round down. So understanding that, let's get started. So we have our follower, number 1, and it goes ahead and asks the leader, hey, am I going to go down to 1,000, as we see on the left here, or am I going to go up to 2,000? Well then, considering that it's the number 2 and it's between 1 through 4, the number 2 tells number 1, I think you're going to go down to 1,000. So therefore, the number and the answer is that we round down to 1,000. So let's go ahead and take a look at another question and another example. So our story of rounding up to the nearest thousand continues with the number 9,702, where our follower today is going to be the number 9, with its leader being the number 7. And our leader is just going to be arcing arrow. So, going on with the story, the 7 tells the 9, well, since I am going to be within the 5 to 9 range, I'm going to push you up to the sky. I'm going to push you up to the sky. So instead of going down to 9,000, as we see on the left, we're going to go up to 10,000. So it pushes the number to the number 10,000. And that's how we end up rounding to the nearest thousand. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples for rounding to the nearest 100. Heading into our next chapter of our story, we're going to be looking at how do we round to the nearest 100 place value, as you can see in the lime green. And I'll place an arrow where it is at. And our story begins with the number 7 in the 100 spot as our follower. And its leader, which is going to be to the right, the number 3 in the tens place value, tells the number 7 that I am below 4 and between 1 through 4. Therefore, I need you to round down to the floor. And by doing so, instead of going up to 800, R7 is going to stay at 700, and every other number is going to go down to that 700 as well. And we're going to go and look at another example just to fine tune what we probably already know by now. So this chapter of rounding to the nearest hundred wraps up with the story of the number 8,992. What is interesting about this story is that it's a bigger number, so we need to make sure we understand that we're dealing with which place value. And as always, we're looking for the nearest hundred, and where the 9 is placed within 100 is going to be our main character of the story. And our main character is the follower. So the 9 is the follower. But if we look at it, we have another 9 as the leader that's in the 10th spot. And as every story has gone so far, since we now see that the 9, who's in the 10th spot as the leader, says, well, I'm a 9, and since I'm above 5, I'm going to round up. I'm going to send you to the sky and round up. And that brings us, instead of being at 900 and going down, we now go up to 1,000. But what's interesting is with this is that we have our place value of 8,000, but what's confusing is we can't just plop a 1 over here, because then that would be wrong. What ends up happening is that it moves up all the way to 9,000, because it makes sense that we start off with a place value of 8,000, which is this number. We move up to 1,000 as we've seen in the nearest 100. So we're going ahead and add an additional 1,000 to now come up and make 9,000, which is our final answer to this chapter. And our final chapter today will be involving rounding to the nearest 10th. So our final chapter involves rounding to the nearest 10, which is located in the orange, which I'll put an arrow in. And this story begins with our follower, the 8, that has a leader named 7. And the 7 tells the 8 whether it's going to go up to 90, or is it going to go back down to 80. So the 7 looks over to the right side of the screen and sees that I am between the numbers 5 and 9. Therefore, I need to send you up to the sky and round you up. Since he rounds them up, the 8 will now turn into a 9, and we go into the 90s. And now we have our last story of the final chapter of this lesson, and that's coming up here now. So our final story in this chapter of rounding to the nearest 10, we are looking at more of a tougher number to deal with when we're rounding, and that is 3,098. And we are rounding into the nearest 10. And what is key to note is that we are looking at a value in the tens of 90. So we have our follower, the 9, with its leader, the 8. And as every story has gone, we come to find out that the 8 knows it's between 5 and 9, therefore has to send 9 to the sky. And since 9 is now a 10, we can't have a 10 here. It does not work. Those are two separate numbers. Therefore, we have to understand that we push up to 100 and we move the number over to then have 3,100. And this ends our lesson on rounding. If you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the comment section. Like the video, and it was good working with you, and I shall see you in the next video.